Hi, I'm Rob Bogue,
I'm Terry Bogue.
And we're back again. This time, we're going to talk about understanding shame and guilt. And I think this is one of those things that we all struggle with at some level. And it's one of those things that most of us have never had the opportunity to learn about. So we're going to walk through this topic, and hopefully at the end, you'll understand the difference between shame and guilt and some of the things that cause it.
So let's start with a simple question. Did you lock the door?
I don't remember.
It's a statement,
Oh.
right? It doesn't really have a judgment. I just want to know, hey, did you lock the door? Or I noticed and you didn't lock the door. Doesn't mean anything other than a desire for information. However, the person hearing that question could feel something very different depending on what they're thinking. They may say, don't I always lock the door? Or, why doesn't she trust me? Why doesn't she think I would lock the door? She's checking up on me. It could be, how could I be so irresponsible not to lock the door? How could she think that about me? That's terrible. But the fact is, it could simply be that you want to know, was the door locked? We're going to bed. Is the door locked? Can we go to sleep? There's no judgment implied.
Right. And so that's kind of the key point, is that we don't know why another person's asking. And that sometimes drives this guilt and shame that we feel. So if we start from a blank slide, literally, then we can look at two dimensions that this shame and guilt works on. And there's an internal dimension to external, what we feel internally, what we aspire or espouse for others. And then we have what we have done, our actions, and what we are, who we are. And so if we look at the bottom left-hand corner between internal and have done, well, that's guilt. We have done something bad, so internally and have done. If we look at shame, it's still internal, it's about ourselves, and it's am. This is a part of who I am. It's my character. The other bottom corner is external and have done, and that's judgment, when somebody says, oh, that was awful. And then the last quadrant that we'll look at is this quadrant of blame, and that's both external and talking about the person's character or who they are.
So let's talk about guilt. Guilt's a cognitive, it's an emotional experience. When we believe that we've done something wrong, we've made a bad choice, I did a bad thing, and from that I did bad is I feel bad that I made a bad choice or that I made a poor choice. Overall, guilt's not a bad thing. Guilt can motivate us. It can cause us to change. It can have a positive impact and help us really to move from I did a bad thing to I could do a better thing in the future. An example would be you're sitting in a restaurant with your preschooler and they decide they're tired of sitting at the restaurant and they've had enough time there with you. So they start jumping out of their chair and they're running around the restaurant and they're talking. And so guilt could be, wow, I feel really bad that I can't keep my child quiet and other people might be bothered.
Right. Well, and that moves us towards shame. And shame's a very different thing. It's not I have done bad or I'm doing bad. It is I am bad. And one of the problems with shame is that it leads us to thinking that we're just not enough, that whatever it is that we're supposed to be, some measure that we're supposed to meet, well, we're not there. It's also the thing that makes you think, I'll never be able to make up for who I've been. So whatever you've done bad or in the past, you can look at that and say, well, there's nothing that I could do today that can repay or compensate for that thing that I've done in the past. And the problem is that shame, in all candor, is not all that terribly useful. Well, if we were to revisit the restaurant example and think about that, instead of thinking in guilt that I can't control my child, you make that personal. You say, I'm a bad father or I'm a bad mom because I can't control my child. I am bad because of some things that have been happening. So, but let's transition to the external side.
Right. Okay, so then we have judgment. And judgment really is about someone else. It's making a decision that something is right or wrong based on your own values. So you're watching someone else and you're deciding that what they're doing is right or wrong based on your beliefs. If we go back to our restaurant example, as we're sitting there watching this family and the child's bouncing around, we're like, wow, she should be able to keep her child quiet, or he should do a better job of controlling his child. So it's really about how we think about other people.
So there's a thing that happens with all of us, and it's called fundamental attribution error. And let me explain it. But before I do, think for just a moment about where we left off. We left off with this idea that the external party has a judgment about you and your behavior. And that is okay, except that isn't what we tend to do because of fundamental attribution error. Well, there's this guy by the name of Kurt Levine. Now it's spelled Lewin, but it's said Levine. And he talked about behavior as a function of both person and environment. So whatever behavior you get is partially from the person and partially from the environment. You mix different people in different environments, you get different results. So the thing is our negative behaviors we associate with environment and circumstances. We emphasize the environmental component of it. We say that this is the thing that has caused this negative behavior, and we end up with guilt, right? But when we are talking about others, we tend to assign those negative behaviors to the person themselves, their character, the I am of who they are. And that is really blame.
Right. And blame it's really the opposite of praise, right? You see somebody and you go, wow, they did a great job at that. Blame is you're making a negative idea or a negative statement about someone's character, and it's based on your observation and your morals. So when you're going, wow, he's a horrible person, he did whatever, that's blame. You're attributing him as a person to a behavior that you've based your judgment upon. In our restaurant example, instead of saying, wow, they should have been able to control their child, is they're a horrible parent. How could they not control their children? They shouldn't have those children. You really move that to an entirely different level.
All right, so let's look at some of the reinforcing cycles. These are the things that drive us to think about guilt and shame and judgment and blame. These are the things that generate it, and sometimes in inappropriate ways. Now, the first up on this list is perfectionism. And I don't know about you, but I don't have any holes in my hands. Therefore, I cannot be perfect, right? So I am not going to think that everybody has to be perfect, whether that's internally to myself or externally to other people. The other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to magnify things, right? When you're really close to an event or a person or a situation, what happens is it tends to be the biggest thing you can see. Well, the problem is a year from now or 10 years from now, are you really going to care? Is it really going to be important? It might, but in most cases, probably not. The other thing is we tend to think about the fact that we are fixed, that we don't change, that we don't grow, and we'll learn here in a bit that we actually do. We are capable of growing and changing and becoming better people every day. It doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're 2 or 100, you still have the capacity to grow and change. And the last one of these reinforcing cycles, these things that cause this guilt and shame to escalate, is the idea that hurting people hurt people. And if you've ever heard, don't corner a wild animal because you don't know what they'll do, that's a perfect analogy to hurting people hurting people. When you're hurt, you have no idea how to keep from hurting other people. So let's talk about another dimension of this that is kind of challenging.
So gossip, and we all probably have been guilty of gossip, even though we all try to say, no, not us. Gossip really is, it focuses on our ability to look at the negative attributes of other people and their behaviors, and we share them with someone else. That's the piece of gossip, is like, wow, did you see what they did? And you want to tell somebody, you want to share that. So you focus on negative attributes and behaviors. Then you take that, and that sharing feeds shame it feeds blame, it feeds guilt and judgment. It puts all those pieces together and throws them at other people. It's really that pathway that leads us to judgment and to blame.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we've all experienced gossip about us, we've gossiped ourselves, I'm sure, we learn that we need to build a sort of resilience. So someone's going to say something bad about us, or we'll think something bad about ourselves. And we need to figure out how to build this resilience, this resistance to that sort of thing. And I think that resilience, people really have this perception that it's just about surviving for another day. It's just this perception that we need to just survive, to endure. But resilience isn't endurance. Resilience isn't just that. What resilience is it's thriving in the conditions you're in. It's changing your mental mindset so that whatever's happening around you doesn't change, but the way you react to it does. And one of the ways that you can do that is by developing an attitude of acceptance.
Right. And acceptance is really how we deal with those feelings of guilt, shame, judgment, and blame. It is how we look at ourselves and accept who we are and who we want to be, and how we say, it's okay, I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to be okay with that. And beyond accepting ourselves, we have to accept others and realize that their behavior and who they are isn't something that we need to judge either. It's really, how do we accept who people are? And that acceptance is really possible. We can learn to be more accepting.
Yeah, in fact, that's the concept of neuroplasticity. And that's a really difficult word to say and kind of long, but it really talks about Carol Dweck's work, one that she writes about in Mindset. And she's basically saying that we have the capacity to grow and change. Now, certainly there are other neuroscientists who have said this, but Dweck really focused on the idea that there is a fixed mindset that we can't change, and then a growth mindset that we can change. And as you think about that, you think about the fact that change is growth. In her kind of framing, the way that things are looked at, it is the ability to grow. And so what that's saying is you really can teach an old dog new tricks. And we've demonstrated that with our dogs here, but it's a thing that whether you're 2 or 100, you still have the capacity to grow and change, to become more accepting, and perhaps even to improve your gratitude.
Right. And gratitude really helps us to be more accepting. It helps you to focus on what you have and to be appreciative of those pieces. And in that, you stop focusing so much on those things that you're missing. Focusing on what you have rather than those things you're missing, and you focus on the good in you, and you focus on the good in other people, and you appreciate those good pieces. And as you appreciate those good pieces and have gratitude, you become less judgmental and you become more accepting.
So that leads us to being really real. And that sounds a little redundant, but the idea is that we don't allow ourselves to be real with other people very often. In fact, we're mostly hiding behind a mask. We're projecting some sort of a false image. And when we can get to the point where we're not interested in feeling guilt other than an appropriate amount, and shame, where we're going to feel like we're bad people, when we're ready to do that, when we're really ready to accept the judgment and sometimes even the blame that other people offer us, well, then we're finally ready to acknowledge that not everybody's going to like us. Not everybody is going to accept us for who we are. And we don't have to own that. We don't have to take on that judgment as guilt. We don't have to take on that blame as shame. We have the opportunity to really be us, even if it means other people aren't going to like it. So, thank you.